Welcome to the Wholehearted Wellness Podcast. As a friendly reminder, the Wholehearted Wellness Podcast is not a substitute to receiving mental and physical support from a licensed wellness provider. We encourage you to speak with your wellness provider prior to trying any therapeutic modalities mentioned on this podcast. Welcome back, everyone, to the Wholehearted Wellness Podcast. Today, y'all are in for a treat. We have a Lotus lady here, Elizabeth DeVargas. Thank you so much for being here today.
Of course, I'm so excited to be here.
So, Elizabeth has a really cool, unique area of focus. So, she is a provisionally licensed professional counselor, and she works a lot with communicative disorders. So tell us, what is a communicative disorder or communication disorder?
Yes. So this was an area that kind of fell into my lap during grad school. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of friends around me that were speech language pathologists. And then in my internship, I had 2 clients who had communication disorders. So everything I know about communication disorders and the treatment and how to help people who have them is all through my friends who are in the field of speech language pathology, my own research, and then also just my experience with clients. So I am not a SLP. So to my knowledge, communication disorders are really just about, people who have some sort of impairment in their ability to either receive or send or process communication. So that could be either verbal or nonverbal communication. And sometimes it's even comprehension of language or hearing as well. And they can vary. So some people have more mild forms of communication disorders, and then it can range to more severe. So the one I have the most experience working with is aphasia.
So what is aphasia?
Aphasia is very interesting because it's actually something that happens after either a stroke or a traumatic brain injury or some kind of head injury. And so essentially, to kind of sum it up, it impacts people's speech. It also impacts the way people write and understand either spoken or written language. And there can be different types. So I've worked with a couple different types of aphasia, like Wernicke's aphasia and Broca's aphasia. But really, what I'm working with is the psychological or emotional reactions to people receiving that diagnosis.
Okay. So since you aren't a speech language pathologist, so you're not the one helping them relearn how to speak, but I can imagine for a lot of them, especially if it's happened after a stroke or a TBI, there's some grief and even having to relearn how to do things. I can imagine they're needing some mental health support in that. So what does therapy look like for someone who is experiencing or has recently gotten a communication disorder diagnosis?
100%. There's so much grief because a lot of people, like, for example, I will take aphasia because that's what I have the most experience with. When people receive these diagnoses, it's usually after something that happened that changed their entire life. So I think when people traditionally think about grief, they think about losing a person, but really these people have lost their ability to communicate with the people they love and with people in general and just their human interaction that they're used to. They've lost that. So it looks different. A lot of times their lives look different because some people after a stroke or a TBI, they can't work at their jobs. They can't, participate in the same hobbies or leisure activities that they used to. And so the work I do with people is a lot of meaning making from their suffering and their experiences, and then a lot of grief work and kind of helping them cope with the idea that their life looks different. But that doesn't mean it necessarily has to be bad different. It can be exciting and it gives them new opportunities. And so I kind of do a lot of reframing and helping them work through it in that way.
Yeah. And it's neat you have a play therapy background training and you intuitively use a lot of creative interventions like sand tray therapy, art therapy. And so I can imagine that can help them express their grief and their trauma in this and maybe even find more creative ways to express what they're feeling to their loved ones.
Yes, 100%. And we do that a lot in sessions. Sometimes I'll bring in like arts or collages or photos or all kind of different things. That's just a different modality than just traditionally talking. I think it makes it less intimidating as well because counseling by nature is a very talk-heavy profession, and people think that they're coming in to talk to a professional about their experiences. And so I try to make it, a norm with my clients who have communication disorders that we don't have to talk. And there's other ways to process that grief and process that trauma that don't involve talking at all. And that's why I think Sandtray and other creative interventions are so important when you're working with this population.
Absolutely. You said something that made me think, oh, wow, I had never thought about this. So when you have had a traumatic brain injury or stroke and you lose the way that you would normally communicate how you feel, what you're needing, what you're thinking with your loved one, I can imagine they may feel misunderstood and no longer known, and maybe even with themselves.
Oh, definitely. And that's a lot of what I've done too, especially the strength-based work of just helping them, realize they're very resilient and they're very strong, having to overcome a lot of these challenges, especially when you receive a diagnosis like this. It's hard to relearn everything that you've done up until this point. People have sometimes different jobs that they have to transfer to if they can't do their old one. Some people can't work at all. Some people can't, like I said, do the same hobbies and sort of things that they enjoyed before. So to relearn everything, it does take a lot of strength. And sometimes people are so focused on the pain that comes from that they can't focus on who they are in this new experience. And so a lot of the work I do is trying to pull out those strengths and pull out their new values and new experiences that can help them find meaning in it.
Wow. Our last podcast with Melissa Bowen was talking about midlife crisis and how truly a midlife crisis can happen at any age. And it's anytime you are moving out of a season that you've done something for so long and you're evolving, and how you have to learn how to dream and explore and be okay exploring. And I can imagine that's a lot of what these clients are having to work through, or these people that are having now a communication disorder that they cannot do the same things they used to be able to do.
And it can be very beautiful, too, to find new things that they can do. I'm thinking of one client who she used to be a lawyer, and a lot of her identity was wrapped up in her work and how she was helping people in that way. And so after her stroke, she wasn't able to practice law. So a lot of the work I did with her was finding, okay, what is a new way that you can take the value of helping people and do it post-stroke? And so now she volunteers with a support group, and she helps other people who have experienced strokes, who have aphasia, and she's able to advocate for them and share awareness about what aphasia is and the aftermath of having a stroke and what that looks like and how it impacts her life. So she's still able to help people at her core like she was. It just looks different.
So she's getting to be authentic to her, but she's also getting to try things she may not have ever tried before.
Exactly.
Wow. So there's opportunity there.
Definitely.
There's opportunity there. Very cool.
But sometimes it's just hard whenever people are in something like that is so painful and scary. I can imagine having your whole life reshaped in that way. It sometimes is hard to focus on what can come out of this and what meaning can come out of this. So that's sort of the role that I play, is a sounding board to help them figure out, yes, things look different, but things can also be very beautiful.
And you don't have to rush that process. You can sit in the grief and the loss as long as you need.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Wow, very cool. So what would you recommend those like loved ones that have someone who may have a communication disorder? What would you recommend or even want them to know, and how to best support their loved one with a communication disorder?
I think patience is such a huge virtue that people can exercise, especially I had one client who struggled with stuttering and had a stutter ever since he was younger and in his adult life. Because the world is so fast-paced now and everybody is kind of wanting to get to where they're going, people were not very patient with him, and so that took a toll on his self-esteem and his mental health in turn, because he was trying to keep up, but sometimes it just took him a little bit longer to say things, and that's okay. And same thing with my clients with aphasia. It takes them longer sometimes to process language and to comprehend what people are saying, or even to find a specific word they're looking for. And so just having the patience, again, to try to understand and put yourself in their shoes and learn from their perspective what works for them and what doesn't.
Yeah, makes sense. And I can imagine if somebody who has a communication disorder senses someone's rushing them, it's going to lead them to not want to share.
Definitely. And it causes that anxiety that comes from feeling like they have to perform or they have to say something in a certain way at a certain pace. And for a lot of them, that's just not the reality. Yeah. And that's okay, but people don't understand it. So it can make them feel rushed, which in turn can also make the symptoms worse, which is interesting.
Well, that makes sense with stuttering. Mm-hmm. Stuttering will get worse under stress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming today, Elizabeth. And whenever I met Elizabeth, I didn't even know what aphasia was. And then she shared with me, and I had never thought that, I just never realized that was a thing, and that even how that can come after a stroke.
Yes. And it's so needed, I think, in the mental health space, awareness for people with communication disorders having access to therapy. Because, again, it's such a talk-heavy profession. I think people tend to shy away from it if you have a communication disorder because it can be very intimidating. So something I'm super passionate about is bringing awareness to how we can make counseling more accommodating to people with disabilities, no matter what that looks like. And so I appreciate you having me, giving me the space to talk about it.
Absolutely. Well, if any of you are interested in scheduling with Elizabeth or even have questions for her, you can go on the Lotus website, lotuscounselingandwellness.com, and read a little bit more about her. You can reach out to admin and we'll get you scheduled with her or even get you her email. All right, you guys, thank y'all so much for tuning in. I hope y'all have a good day, and we'll talk to y'all later.